Helo a chroeso i gynhadledd ddigidol Engage for Success Cymru 2020. Bydd ein gynhadledd yn canolbwyntio ar ymgysylltu â gweithwyr a bydd ni'n canolbwyntio ar bob un o'r 4 galluogwr ymgysylltu â gweithwyr drwy lens y 7 nod llesiant o fewn y ddeddf llesiant cenedlaethau'r dyfodol yng Nghymru. Hello and welcome to Engage for Success Wales's Digital Conference 2020. Our conference will focus on employee engagement and we'll be shining a light on each of the 4 enablers of employee engagement through the lens of the 7 wellbeing goals of the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act in Wales. This year, we are delighted to be bringing this to you in association with Business News Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn. In 2009, the MacLeod report was published. Its authors, David MacLeod and Nita Clark, were commissioned to conduct research into high-performing organisations across all sectors. And to elicit what these high-performing organisations had in common, their research found that there were 4 common themes. Firstly, they had visible, empowering leadership which provided a strong, strategic narrative about the organisation, where it had come from and where it was going. Secondly, each organisation had engaging managers who focused on their people, who coached and stretched them to reach their potential, and who treated each person as an individual. Thirdly, there was a strong employee voice throughout the organisations. Employees were seen as central to the solution, to be involved, listened to, and invited to contribute their experience, expertise, and ideas. Finally, they had organisational integrity, meaning that the values on the wall were genuinely reflected in day-to-day behaviours. There was no say-do gap, promises made were promises kept, or an explanation was given as to why not. These 4 common themes of strategic narrative, engaging managers, employee voice, and organisational integrity were defined as the 4 enablers of engagement. But why does employee engagement matter? It matters because there is a direct correlation between levels of employee engagement and levels of productivity, revenue growth and net profit, employee turnover, customer satisfaction, innovation, efficiency, and even health and safety. The analysis of evidence shows only around 1/3 of UK employees say they are actively engaged. 20 million workers are not delivering their full capability or realising their potential at work. 64% of people say they have more to offer in skills and talents than they are currently being asked to contribute at work. There is no doubt that 2020 has been economically challenging, with a slump in GDP and a huge increase in unemployment. This area of employee engagement is something within our influence to change, something that can assist in business growth at a time when so many businesses are under huge pressures. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I thank our sponsors for this session, CIPD Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Finally, our conference is a not-for-profit venture. All attendance is free and profits will be donated to our partner charity, Daring to Dream. Donations can be made via www.daringtodream.wales and will help support the emotional health and well-being of patients in Wales. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Good morning. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 3rd conversation in our Engage for Success Cymru conference this year, which of course we're doing online. So welcome to you all, and welcome to my 3 guests, illustrious guests we have with us this morning. Today we're going to be looking at well-being, and with a particular, obviously, we've been through some really trying times this year. So there will be a different slant, I guess, on the engagement conversations that we've had previously in the conferences that we've done before here at Engage for Success Wales. Just to give you a little bit of framing on what we're going to be talking about. So what I'd like to do is introduce my guests to you. So we have Kathy, Andreas, and Helen with us today. As I say, my name is James. I'm part of the Engage for Success Wales team and hosting our great conversation today. So let's just whiz around the room, our virtual coffee table, sat around having a cup of coffee together. Kathy, would you like to introduce yourself? That would be great.
Thanks, James, and pleased to be here today. It's such an important topic. So my background, I am the founder of Office Arm. We love going to businesses and helping employees sort of boost their well-being and look after their stress levels. I'm a BACP registered counsellor. I've done that for over 15 years, and I've been working more as a counsellor this year, and it's been really interesting during the pandemic and hearing so many different stories and what people have been through this year.
Lovely, thank you. Andreas?
Most people recognize the name simply because I had a previous career playing professional sport, was very fortunate to play for Wales, play for the Cardiff Blues for 5 years. But actually I did a master's degree in psychology while I was playing. So after playing, I quickly moved over into working in the field as an applied scientist, looking at human systems in the workplace. So running training on how the brain works, the science behind sleep or digital well-being, while also working in with companies to help ensure that we can adapt the workplace to better suit the needs of the next generation of the workforce.
Sure, lovely. Thank you very much. And definitely last but definitely not least, Helen. Hi.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you this morning. I'm Helen. I'm an anaesthetic trainee based in Prince Charles Hospital. I'm also a medical director fellow in Cwmtach Morgannwg. I'm a Bevan exemplar and the founder and project lead of the Distance Aware Initiative. So
Wonderful.
I'm working within the management system in Cwmtach.
Okay, so I'm sure you've seen some interesting developments over this year, certainly from a health perspective, as have we all. Just to frame a little bit about the theme for our conference this year, certainly is looking at the well-being of the Future Generations Act. It's been around since 2015, and yesterday we were really lucky to have the Commissioner for the Future Generations, Sophie Howe, hosted our conversation around leadership, which was really good. I hope you managed to check that out yesterday. If not, it will be available on the website next week, so you can catch up on all these conversations again. I think it's a unique thing that we have here in Wales, in that we actually have an act which is looking at the future of the country and shaping the future of the country. And within that, there is the word well-being appears enormously. The well-being goals in the act of wanting a Wales that's prosperous, resilient, more equal, having cohesive communities, a vibrant culture and a thriving Welsh language, being globally responsible. But one of the most key things in there, and I sort of left it to last, is a healthier Wales. And certainly, we've seen health coming to the fore enormously this year. And I guess the focus of that act is the Wales that we want. It was generated by many people coming together saying, what do we want for our country going forward? And obviously, the most important thing that we need for a healthy country is to have a prosperous country, a country that's prospering with business at the centre. And we know, you would have seen from the introduction that Rodri did, that engagement is absolutely critical to that, to enabling businesses to be successful. And if any of you are sort of grappling about, what is this engagement thing? If you think about the best job you ever had and the best manager you ever had and the best company you ever worked for, think about that right now. That's that engaged feeling. When you really feel emotionally invested in the business and you feel looked after and you want to do a great job, that's engagement. So obviously, well-being is key and is at the heart of that. People being healthy, both from a physical, mental perspective, being developed, etc. So our conversation today is focused on one of the four enablers from Engage with Success, which is engaging managers. And obviously the role of managers and leaders looking at the emotional health and the well-being of their team members is absolutely critical. But I'd sort of like to get my guest slant on it. And we'll start with Helen, if that's okay. Helen, how important do you think well-being is to employees? Obviously you see it from a health perspective. How important do you think well-being is to people, particularly looking at what we've been through this year?
Personally, I think it's incredibly important. I think we've seen the benefits in a lot of studies that if you've got happy, healthy workforce, they tend to be more productive. They tend to stay around. and it tends to be a much more attractive place to work. I think at the moment we've got particular pressures in the NHS across the country, where we've got staffing pressures, which are leading to emotional and physical difficulties in supporting staff and making them feel supported. But then we also have another group of people who've been shielding, or who are classed in this vulnerable category, or who have a family member who is. And how do you support them? And that's the other side of it, is actually how can you support them? Because actually they might not be on the shielding list, but they might still be in contact with a lot of, or a high risk area, but have a child or a relative at home who they want to protect, which will have an enormous emotional and psychological impact on those individuals.
Mm-hmm. And what impacts have you seen in those that you're working with regards to their sort of levels of engagement? Have you seen that? Is it rising? Is it dropping?
So I think it varies. I think there was a huge number of resources put in to support people when the pandemic hit. And actually, I think now a lot of those resources are being used more than they were initially, because actually I think we do the standard thing of just put your head down, get on with it in the initial period. And it's during that kind of lull when you've actually had a time to reflect on what's happened and what's happening, that actually then you feel like you need to speak to somebody about it, and you feel like you need a bit more support and want to engage in it. So it's important that those things aren't just there in the short term, but are actually there longer term as well.
Yeah, and I guess can be delivered consistently on an ongoing basis is really important. I think sometimes we see initiative overload, don't we, where companies or organisations put initiatives in and they have a big impact for a short period of time, and then they say, okay, we've done that, and then they move on to the next thing. So keeping these sort of these wellbeing initiatives in place and consistently in place is important. Excellent, thank you for that. Andreas, I just wanted to ask you a slightly different question around wellbeing. Do you think wellbeing is actually an engaging and motivating activity in and of itself, or does it have to be built in with other things?
I guess before some of the disruption caused by COVID-19, I probably would have answered that a little bit different. But one of the things that I've seen recently, especially working in the public sector, is that actually wellbeing can be a really good focus point to help boost team morale and actually help build teamwork, especially since a lot of the conversation, a lot of interactions is happening this way. And we know from the social sciences, for example, that nearly 90% of communication is non-verbal. So we don't quite get it. As much as I can see you right there, I'm not actually getting all the non-verbal cues that I would usually get if we were actually in the room, right? So engagement is actually shifted. There's a bit of a challenge in this. And it's a model that I've generally used in a number of different contexts. If you look at, say, the 5 stages of change, like the trans-theoretical model of change, the reason why that's really good is it measures engagement. I mean, for some people, well-being is not on the radar. There's all these other priorities that I have right now. I know it's important, so which means I'm present, I'm not actually engaged, right through to people who are in the preparation phase, and so they're starting to be engaged. They're starting to become part of the conversation, but actually starting to do it. And this is where I think we really trip up, is when you take past the action phase, you get into the maintenance phase, that 5th stage, right? This is when people are actually engaged with the well-being, not just in the conversation, but actually doing it. It's one of the biggest challenges I find, especially working with leaders, because the challenge there is they look after so many people and they bring that authentic self. They really care about their staff, about their people, about their team. But you ask them a couple of simple questions like, did you have any water before you had your first cup of coffee this morning? No. Did you get at least 7-8 hours of sleep last night? No. That link I sent you to come to meet here today, I sent it to you at 8 o'clock last night on purpose. Did you read it before you went to bed? Yes. Why? I don't know. Okay, so are they actually engaged or are they present? And this is the same challenge. But this is where having some more informal conversations around the topic of well-being can really help stimulate that team cohesion conversation.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, all 4 of us have been involved in the wellbeing field for some time. I was formerly head of wellbeing for a large business, and trying to get wellbeing on the agenda, it was just like trying to push water uphill. It's always been the thing that has the budget cut first, But it really has, what we've been through has forced it to the fore. And I think businesses that have done it really well and have engaged their people really well have put well-being at the front. Potentially those who haven't, they're starting to see that maybe coming unstuck. Kathy, I'd like to ask you, what have you seen out in the private sector with regards to well-being? Have you seen more interest being generated, or has it been fairly static?
Yeah, so I think generally there's been a huge trend towards wellbeing over the past few years, and it is definitely growing. But I think it's interesting some of the things you're saying. So I think a lot of us know the importance, like sort of Helen was saying. A lot of people really know that, but I think there's still a kind of, you said pushing water uphill, James. I think there's a lot of people who find well-being a turn off. And I think most of us know the value. Most of us know it's the thing that takes us from okay to great. It's the thing that takes us from struggling to thriving. And working on well-being is really powerful and has massive benefits. But not everybody really wants to do it. And yeah, I think it's been brilliant working with so many organisations. The organisations where it feels really powerful are the ones where it's really embedded in the culture, and it's the leaders are involved, and it's at all levels, and it's that sort of value-driven thing that is just so important, and you can feel it in the organisation. Very often well-being is a tick box thing, and it's brought out once a year, and great to get people interested. But what you were saying, Andrea, is about the maintenance. Actually, it needs to be part of the culture. It needs to be something we do every day. And I think the pandemic has a lot of people have done more for well-being, which is great. But like you were saying, James, there are gaps, and there's bound to be. There's all sorts of blocks to having it embedded and having it where it needs to be in organisations. Budgets, like you're saying, it can be the first thing to get cut. And this year, there's been huge pressure on budgets for all sorts of reasons. But it is so important. So hopefully that importance will grow.
Mm-hmm. So whilst we're talking about that, how do you, when you're working with a business, obviously, engagement being key, being around well-being, how do you encourage businesses that aren't necessarily doing anything on well-being to adopt a program and to get stuck in and to do something around it? That was for you, Kathy. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that is a great question, one that we ask ourselves a lot. But we love talking to people.
I'm asking you for the magic fairy dust there. I really
I got the golden eye. But it is. I think also leading by example, and there's a lot of organisations talking about what they do. If you open LinkedIn, there's so many good conversations about what people are doing for wellbeing, and I think it's a ripple effect, and it's growing. But we need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep talking about the benefits. We need to keep leading by example. It really, really helps.
Cool. I guess one of the key roles here that we're talking about is leadership, isn't it? And how leaders actually drive their business or their organisation from a well-being perspective. It's a question for you, Helen. I think really, what do you think the challenges are in ensuring that employees, colleagues, etc., are not overloaded with stress and are able to access that support you were talking about?
Well, I think there's a number of difficulties. I think actually one of the things the pandemic has thrown up is actually there is so much support out there that people don't know exactly where to go to for what's necessarily deemed the right support or the targeted support for maybe what they need. So I think really good signposting is really important. But I think it's also important to recognise that actually you don't need a huge wellbeing budget. You don't need a lot of money to make big changes. Sometimes it's just putting aside 20 minutes to say, are you okay? Are you happy in your workplace? Can we do anything to support you? It might be that you've got your kids self-isolating at the moment and there's no one at home with them. And even though they're 14 or 15, you feel like you should be at home. So actually, could you leave a little bit earlier? Or could you work from home one day a week? And these are kind of ongoing dialogues. So I think the more dialogue that's going on between all levels, not just senior levels in management, but also between employee levels, so people can be a bit more flexible with what's going on to be a bit more supported, be signposted. And then you can also, when people are better informed, they can help signpost each other to different resources as well, instead of always having to go through what may be deemed the wellbeing service. You end up having those more informal conversations as they become embedded in the organisation.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, that it's not just the well-being or the occupational health or whoever you happen to have in the organisation that's responsible for well-being. I think one thing that the pandemic has taught us, and we've seen this in some of the employee research we've been doing recently, is that in businesses that have been looking after, or in organisations that have been looking after their people, the scores that they get for questions around caring and concerning for their people, being concerned for their people, have really risen where people have done that well. Andreas, what are your thoughts on that one around leadership?
I actually think that's something Helen mentioned that's quite important, the fact that there's so much support now available. And I think there's actually a bit of a challenge in that, because there's a shift. Part of the reason why we see there's so much support now is because great organizations, whether they be third sector or actually companies themselves, right? Whether it be consultants coming in, but whatever it is, like, so much more support now than there was, say, a decade ago. Right? But my question is, have we gotten to that sort of tipping point where maybe we've been hitting the target on raising stigma, awareness, doing all that, but maybe missing the point? Because, and what I mean by that is there is a positive side to stress. Stress is completely normal. Without stress, we wouldn't become more resilient. As a young individual, I want to be put under a little bit of financial stress so I can learn how to use money. Stress is completely normal. And one of the challenges is that we've done so much on breaking stigmas and raising awareness, as we should do. Like, say, for example, if I said 1 in 4 of us will at some point experience some form of mental ill health, right? It's a common statistic. Well, by definition, that would mean 3 out of 4 of us don't or aren't. And it's not arbitrary. Those 3 out of 4 do things that happen to boost their overall well-being. And so what are those things? So when you have the conversations with organization and leaders in particular, to recognize that when we talk about well-being, we're not just talking about an intervention strategy. We're actually talking about stuff that would help boost morale, that would promote psychological safe workplaces where people can bring their authentic self. And ultimately, when you have a working group that works with that authentic self, that's where problem solving, innovation sits. And so there is a positive side to it. So as much as we really made sure, as we should do, that there's support for the 1 in 4, it's now really interesting to see how organizations, especially progressive organizations, recognize, well, actually, if we balance that out with some material, with some training that actually looks at the 3 out of 4, then actually what we start to see is morale starts boosting. And again, there's just a different conversation. It's not just the ill health conversation. Well-being has a positive end of a spectrum. There's this conversation to be had about that as well.
Actually, having a well-led business where engagement is, definitely one of the metrics that people look at, where people are helping to drive that forward and make a more positive organisation, it will naturally result in a business that has well-being at its heart, because people feel that much better. I'd be interested just to explore some of the neuroscience stuff behind that, Andreas. Because we know that things like micro stressors, people get little bursts of adrenaline, and that they can be good. I've got to hit a deadline, get a little bit of adrenaline hit, off you go, you hit your deadline. How are you using sort of neuroscience and the sort of behavioural sciences with regards to well-being?
I think the easiest way to explain is if we look at, because again, there's roughly 20 neurotransmitters. You go to GABA, acetylcholine, there's I think norepinephrine, that adrenaline one that you're talking about. There's so many of them. But generally a way to think about it, if you think about how we went through that first lockdown, so 23rd of March, for example, we go into the first lockdown, and all of a sudden it's all about, okay, once we got over the toilet paper and pasta issue, right? Once we got over that, right? Everything was about Joe Wicks. Everything was about new healthy habits that we're going to form. We're going to eat healthy. The activities with the kids. Those first 4 weeks, we had all these charts and fun things we're going to do with the kids, right? And so it's all about our dopaminergic system, the reward pathway, the here, the now, right? Inner drive, dopamine plays a key part in that. And I know there's so much research out there, and we're seeing it now with a lot of things about social media, how our phones tap our dopaminergic system. I know there's a lot out there. But actually, there's a positive side to dopamine. Helps us problem solve. Dopamine helps us learn. And so in that space, that first 4 weeks was really interesting when we went into lockdown. But then you saw a shift, right? Around about week 6 to 8, we saw a shift. as we started moving out of our dopaminergic system, this here, this now, this resources for me, into wanting to be socially connected. And that's our serotonin system, social inclusion. The human animal, we are wired to be social. We form more neural connections between 0 and 3 than we do for the rest of our lives. And we are 100% reliant on a caregiver during 0 and 3. We are wired to be social. And so when you then started seeing at week 8, all of a sudden clapping for the NHS, raising awareness for so many charities and events, the street parties, you started seeing some of the dinner parties. Again, we're starting to try and find new ways to connect because we were missing the water cooler conversations, the parking next to a colleague in the car park and walking in, talking about bake-off. Those little social interactions are vitally important to our well-being. And this is the important thing then for leaders. And this is why once you explain not only how to be more well, really why? I mean, why does the human animal have serotonin? Right? Why do we get it from sunlight? 90% of the serotonin we get that help regulate our mood sits in our gut. Once you explain it in that simple way, it just stimulates a new conversation, which may help a leader then to touch base with some of their colleagues to be able to say, hey, I'm just checking in. And we both sat through that thing. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so I'm trying to figure this out. It just makes it a less formal conversation because sometimes it can be awkward. For a leader nowadays, I mean, can you imagine picking up the phone to one of your colleagues to say, and a colleague picks up expecting a work conversation, right? He goes, hi, how you doing? I'm okay. What's up? No, I'm just checking in. Oh, everything okay? We don't, human systems, we're messy, we're complex. We don't have those sort of conversations anymore. And WhatsApp doesn't cut it for that real checking in. You know, as a leader, you'd be able to be with your staff and really get to see. You'd be able to sit in a room and pick up, hey, you're a bit quiet. What's up? Everything okay? We'd have those. Now, in post-COVID, we can't have those. So our serotonin system is really trying to kick in to say, how do we form new social connections, new teams? And we can use technology to a degree to do that. But we're missing on that human factor.
Yeah, this is the thing with Zoom overload, and here we are interacting virtually, and in how we communicate. We use 55% of the way we communicate is through our body language, and we don't get that. We can see people's shiny heads and nice backgrounds, but we miss that. So almost half of how we communicate is missing, isn't it? So that's bound to have a big effect on people, isn't it? Kathy, I guess an interesting question. Something that I often talk about is, so some of the people that we work with, they're brilliant at what they do, whether they're making cars or printing books or running a shop or a hotel. Not everybody that we work with has ever been trained or been given any sort of skills in leading people. How do you sort of see that from a well-being perspective, and how that may have changed in the last sort of 6 to 9 months?
Yeah, and it's really important, isn't it, those skills in supporting people. And I think very often people are promoted because they're technical specialists and they've risen to the top of their technical skills and they're promoted into a management role. And they don't necessarily have people skills. I think there's a survey out from Business News, published in Business News World a few years ago. I think only something like half of managers felt confident in talking to people about mental health. And, like Helen was saying earlier, often wellbeing doesn't have to be a huge thing. It is as someone checking in with how you are, your manager being interested in how you are. There was a survey out from the CMI, the Chartered Management Institute, a couple of weeks ago about the pandemic specifically, but 95% of respondents said that communication was the thing they wanted most from their managers, like good communication. And it makes an enormous difference to our well-being. It's huge, and the managers need these skills. And I speak to a lot of managers who don't feel confident in asking people about their well-being and their mental health. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about sort of talking to people on screens, and we lose a lot of information. But I did an online counselling course just to refresh my skills earlier in the pandemic, but they were saying actually it doesn't have to be worse. It's different. Speaking to people like this is different, but it doesn't have to be worse. And for some people, they might be more honest in this environment. They might be more likely to tell you how they're really feeling when they're not in an open plan office, when there's not people walking past the room. So, don't discount this sort of connection, because, I've been counselling this way for months now, And at first it was like, whoa, I'm losing information here. But actually, you can really connect to somebody. You can still see them, you can still hear them, and there's a lot of information like this. So, I do encourage managers and leaders to have the conversations, ask people how they're feeling, and don't be afraid of that, and don't think because there's a screen between us it is worse. We can still get to the things we need to get to. And it is different, we can't go to the loo and see someone crying. We're not seeing somebody like raging at their laptop. We're missing a lot of stuff. And that synchronicity where you bump into somebody in the corridor and you just have that little conversation about something that leads to more ideas. Like, we're missing a lot of that. And there's other ways of doing things. So I think this year has shown us how flexible and adaptable humans can be. And there's been doing some sort of manager sessions, and there's just been some brilliant creativity managers have done in motivating their teams and sort of leading people and making a difference. So there's a lot of hope out there, and I think leaders have done some brilliant things.
Yeah, I guess it's just trying to keep these things going consistently, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Rather than getting to that exhaustion point of, oh my word, I've got to have my 5 conversations for this week. And I guess it's certainly, sometimes we've had conversation with people where they want to put some kind of success metric, or they want to measure the return on investment in well-being. Helen, is there anything that any insights that you've got on how people might be able to measure the success of what they're doing on a well-being perspective, or is it too amorphous to be able to pin it down to an absence figure? Or
I think that's a really difficult question. I think
I didn't ask it because it was easy.
I think everybody's perspective of their own well-being and how their health and well-being is supported in a workplace, I think that will differ very much from individual to individual. So you're very much looking at a qualitative feedback as opposed to a quantitative feedback, which makes it very difficult to then form any kind of a matrix that you could put together. However, I would say that if you have people who are happy in work, feel supported in work, and want to go to work, then you're doing something right. It's like what Andreas was saying, it's about not just the one person who's maybe got something that they're struggling with, but if people are really feeling that they're thriving and that they're contributing and that they're really enjoying work, it will bring out the best in them, which is to the benefit of your business. So it's not just on an individual level, it's to everybody's benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we could have that phrase put on a T-shirt, actually, because that was a brilliant summary of the benefits of having an engaged workforce. And again, trying to put a label of employee engagement on it is always a tricky one, because people have always got their own understanding of what it means, I suppose. Okay, that's really interesting. I guess same question to you, Andreas. Measurement, and when you're going out there working, particularly the private sector, how do you sort of convince people that well-being, at stroke engagement is something that they really need to focus on? I think that would be useful for people listening to our conversation today.
I'll be honest, I don't think that there's much of a hard sell.
No.
Anymore. What we're seeing now is a real big demand for organizations to say, look, we not only want some support on this, the reason we're going to get you from the outside is because as leaders, we want to sit next to our staff. We want to be part of whatever the initiative is. We don't want it to see like a hierarchical structure, especially when you're working with millennials, for example, half the workforce now, and you got your Gen Z stepping into the new world of work. I mean, these guys are different. You used to have your babies would be part of the organization until the retirement age, very loyal in that regard. And I'm not saying that millennials and Gen Zs aren't loyal, but what they do is they grew up with technology that allowed them more flexibility, more autonomy. So for them, if you think about the 3 fundamental factors for identifying as well, right? A sense of autonomy, a sense of competency, and a sense of connectedness. Right? And what we're seeing from senior leaders is they say, well, we want the sense of connectedness, which means we want to be with our staff to go through whatever the initiative is. So for some, it's obviously physical well-being. For others, it's more understanding mindfulness and yoga and how to de-stress. For others, it might be digital well-being, which is quite a new one. I think like for us a year ago, very few people were talking about digital well-being. And yet now that ability to unplug, right, to have a good work-life balance, well, leaders are saying, well, rather than you come and speak to my staff. Well, I want to be there with my staff. I want to learn with them. I want to be connected to them in that way. And yes, the challenge then is, how do we measure that? And yet when you find progressive leaders, the measure for them is not in some report. The measure for them is how they feel about it and whether they recognize, I'm not done 17 days, 24 days, I'm on day 35, or whatever it is, whatever that metric is, whether for that group it might be happiness, for others it might be productivity, for others it may be just that sense of well-being. Again, everybody's different in that regard. But what I'm seeing is when leaders step forward and say, well, I want to be with the staff to promote this, because when my staff see it in me, then we all benefit. And so again, what I'm not necessarily seeing is us having to approach organizations. They're actually approaching us to say, look, how do we do this? And we want to do it in a fun and an engaging way.
Yeah. And I think, certainly, what we've been through the last, this year, I'm not going to say the last 6 months, because it's the whole year, isn't it? Has seen, people who have those skills have been able to take it forward. And I guess there are people out there who are wondering, I really want to do something on wellbeing. What can I do? I guess carrying on with yourself, Andreas, what sort of leadership skills do you think people need in order to be able to get wellbeing on the agenda if they haven't done it already?
Yeah, look, it's a complex one, but at the end of the day, I think what we start to see, we live in this world, we've got all the information. I mean, if you want leadership models, there's like a gazillion of them, right? It's that applied side that we're seeing is really interesting. We have access, most people now have access to the how to do it, right? If you're a leader, go read Simon Sinek's book, for example. There you got loads of strategies, or Adam Alter's, or you can read so many. Well, the challenge is there's so much information, we just don't know what to do next. What's the simple step that I need to take? What I'm starting to recognize now is almost the simpler the better, but it just starts with finding out what is really the key interest for that particular leader. Now, the key thing, as Kat's already mentioned, which is communication, seems to be nearly every time stand out so much. To say, okay, usually when I'm in the room, I'm pretty good with communicating with people, but now I'm kind of struggling. Can you give me some ideas to help with this? And I mean, yes, you can use technology in this way. I mean, I can give you a quick example of something that we did only recently with a leader who was basically saying, look, how do I stimulate some more informal conversations with my staff to try and see I want to check if they're okay, but it's kind of hard to have that conversation. And so we just use backgrounds. I mean, on every Friday morning, everybody comes in and they'll simply say, look, your background reflects how you're feeling today. And that could be as simple as this, right? So I can, for example, put something like this up here, right? Hopefully, if I show up on a Friday and say, this is how I feel today, versus if I show up on a Friday and I say, this is how I feel today.
I like that one.
Right? And again, you'll be surprised how these small little cues actually fundamentally change the conversation. And it doesn't have to be this, we're going to go deep, there's this big conversation to be had there. It's pretty simple to do, especially when your team now get to see how your leader feels. Because the leader could come in there and have the big storm and go, what's up? And then you start recognizing, well, actually, the leader happens to be a caregiver for a parent at the moment. And that could actually be putting pressure on them. It's just a simple consideration. We're seeing the emergence of a new sort of diversity, caregiver, and how this has affected them. So we're seeing parents, for example, but also those who are looking after parents. And some of the complexities that sit there, which allows the team to recognize, the human side of whoever their leader is. Yeah. So something as simple as an easy example of how we've been able to engage in that way.
Yeah. And if there is something positive that comes out of what we've done, I think it's made us all connect more on a human basis, isn't it? With person to person rather than, managing director to head of so-and-so. We've become more focused on ourselves as people with real lives, haven't we? Something that I've been banging the drum for a long time. People say, what is it that you want to achieve? And for me, it's, when people go home, they're not worried about work, and when people go to work, they're not worried about home. And that's always been an imbalance for me, where you can see people who, you talked about presenteeism earlier on, Andreas, that people are at work thinking, oh my God, I've got to do this when I get home, and I've got to look after the kids, and I've got to do that. And then when they go home, they're thinking, I didn't do all those emails, and I didn't do what I needed to do. And I think to a degree, it sort of helps. Certainly from what we're seeing, it's helped to rebalance that a little bit. And I think from an employee engagement perspective, people are becoming more engaged in their life rather than they're engaged in their work and engaged in their home. They sort of merged between the two, haven't they? Helen, just some thoughts from yourself around leadership, particularly in your sector. Who's looking after the leaders? It's all very well saying leaders should look after everyone and managers have got to do this. How do you see the challenge of the leaders actually and the managers getting that kind of support so that they remain engaged?
So I'm very much a believer that there is never only one leader in an organisation. That a good organisation is made up of a lot of leaders who lead on different levels, but are also willing to be led by others, and that, like we touched on before, the hierarchy is. While there is always going to be a hierarchy in the NHS, it's important that it's a flat escalation and that you have conversations on an equal level, no matter who you're having them with. So even though you might be more senior in the hierarchy, you will have that conversation with somebody who could be much further down in terms of training level. You could be the CEO having a conversation with an F1, but you will have a conversation with them at an equal level, and then you will take it, you'll escalate it as appropriate. I think we're very fortunate. So we've got a leadership team in Cwmtaf, and we very much try to support each other. And be that having a conversation about next year's castings for the Christmas Panto, which has been something that's happened this week. Just to pick everybody up when things are getting a little bit heavy. I think it makes a huge difference. Also, before I started my fellowship, I don't think I really realised how big a difference and how big an impact just an email from a manager saying, "Thank you for your hard work. I really appreciate it. I know you're working very hard, and if we can do anything to help, please let us know."
Yeah,
that makes an enormous difference, particularly when you are cut off, or not cut off, but you're not seeing people in person. So a lot of us are working from home. We're not seeing people as much as we would normally. So actually, just someone taking time between two Teams meetings to say, I know everyone's working really hard. I know it's difficult. I really appreciate it. And is there anyone who's willing to sing in the Christmas Tenebris Choir? It makes a huge difference. It just picks people up. You can pick out things that just give people a bit of hope going forward as well. It is heavy. I think all of us in the NHS are feeling at the moment. It's heavy. There's a lot on everybody's plate. But as a leadership team, we take our responsibility to support each other very seriously, as well as to support those in their departments and those leading their departments to be able to support their own staff as well, because the organisation's got thousands of employees. It's not just one manager, and they need to be able to have a discussion with all of those employees. There's a real sense of trust that those conversations escalate down, but when it happens at all levels, everyone's much more likely to engage. And I don't think there should ever be a feeling from people that you can't ask, "Are you okay?" in the other direction of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
So I would quite often say to the medical director when I meet him, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And that's a two-way conversation. So even though he's my boss, it's a two-way conversation. He knows that if I can do something to support him, I'll do it, and vice versa. So I think it's important that leaders are supported too. And I think often it's family that tend to do a lot of that supporting, and maybe people outside of the organisation. But it is very rewarding, and it is very nice when people in the organisation actually ask that question going up as well.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really, really good answer. I think, if anything, again, coming back to what we've been through this year, if anything has been a positive, it's potentially made more of a level playing field. Hierarchies of businesses are becoming flattened, and we care more about each other rather than our job and our position. It's more about us being humans and people together, isn't it? Okay, so we've got this is our final sort of quick whiz round the room. So I'm gonna give you 30 seconds each to give your well-being top tips to everyone that's taking part in this conversation. So if you were going to give a couple of top tips or a call to action to around well-being, with that focus on employee engagement, what would your top tips be? So I'm going to go to you first, Andreas.
3 things, real simple. Are you actually prioritizing your sleep? And there's a simple test for this. When is your digital sunset? At what time of the day do you go, okay, lights start coming down, emails are off, I'm getting ready for my bedtime routine, right? So that will be a good indicator whether it's a priority for you or not, right? The second thing for me would be a general simple one. The brain is made up of 70% water, right? It only takes 2% of dehydration to affect things like our attention or our memory, right? So again, stay hydrated. And then 90% of the serotonin, which is the one that regulates our mood, sits in our gut. So this time of year where we can't get sunshine, I would go for sleep and making sure we get some healthy nutrients in. Dead simple. Add to that some physical activity, not just exercise. You're on to a winner. Those who've got the schedule.
Lovely, thank you. Helen, top tips?
I would probably go with ask people to communicate, make it as open a communication system as you can. Feel free to say, are you okay? Also, I loved Andreas's backgrounds. I thought they were brilliant.
Wasn't it great? I've written that down.
I might take those away with me. That's probably the call to action I would take, actually.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Kathy, top tips?
Well, for me, it all starts with awareness. Like, do stop and notice how you're feeling. It's so easy just to be on a hamster wheel and keep going, but stop, checking with how you feel. And the people around you, like you're saying about asking, but ask twice, how are you feeling? How are you really feeling? And start with awareness and then put in place what works. Is there some action needed? Do you need to change something? Do you need to do something different? And notice how we feel, react to that. And then the proactive side is so important as well, that we do all the things that Andreas mentioned. We look after ourselves, prioritize self-care, and make sure it is a priority, because if we're going to be well, if we're going to prioritize well-being, we need to look after ourselves. It often starts with us, and as leaders, we're giving other people space to do that as well, and we're leading by example.
Fabulous. Well, listen, thank you. I want to thank my fabulous panel today for a really, really interesting conversation. And we've got some great top tips there. So Kathy, Helen, Andreas, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us in this conversation, those of you who've been watching. And we really look forward to seeing the other talks that we've got coming up in our conference this year. Stay safe, be well, diolch yn fawr.
Ar ran Engage for Success Cymru, hoffwn ni ddiolch eto I bawb sydd wedi cyfrannu heddiw yn ogystal â noddwyr. Byddwn ni heb wedi gallu gwneud hyn hebddo chi. On behalf of Engage for Success Wales, may I again thank each of our conversationalists today, as well as our sponsors. We could not have done this without you. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Ni'n gobeithio bych chi gallu fynychu'r sesiynau eraill a hefyd yn edrych ar y cynnwys ar-lein lle mae dewis o erthyglau ar gael. We hope you will tune in to our other sessions and also check out our content online, where we have a selection of articles. Diolch yn fawr iawn, cadwch yn ddiogel ac aroswch yn iach. Thank you, stay safe and stay well.